Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, amidst talk about red lines for Iran's nuclear program, is Israel preparing for a unilateral strike? Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for your live feedback. Malika, Israel's prime minister has been pleading his case on Iran to the U.S. media. What's our social media community saying about all this?
Well, we asked our community if they think that Netanyahu is using the U.S. election to push for war. They responded en masse. Here's a tweet from Shalene who says, Bibi, as Netanyahu is called, doesn't play. Unfortunately for the world, Israel dictates foreign policy for the USA. So if you're at home and you agree with that statement or you disagree, let us know. Tweet us your thoughts at #AJStream.
And with us here at the table is Trita Parsi. He is the founder and president of the National Iranian American Council and the author of A Single Roll of the Dice, Obama's Diplomacy with Iran. Trita, welcome back to the stream.
Thank you for having me again.
Glad to have you. Trita is here with us in D.C., but in order to hear directly from community members in Israel, we turn to Google+. They'll be jumping into our conversation shortly. Now, if you want to join in our conversations, just add us to your circles on Google+, and you too could wind up in the stream.
My name is Decker Gongang, and I believe that global access to a high-quality education is the key to the future, and I am in the stream.
Concern over Iran's nuclear program has been growing for years, and so far the international response has been to increase economic sanctions. Israel calls for more to be done, particularly by the U.S., where Israel's prime minister made the media rounds on Sunday. Here's Benjamin Netanyahu on NBC's Meet the Press.
No, President Obama has said that he is determined to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. I appreciate that and I respect that. I think implicit in that is that if you're determined to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons, it means you'll act before they get nuclear weapons. I just think that it's important to communicate to Iran that there's a line that they won't cross. I think a red line in this case works to reduce the chances of the need for military action, because once the Iranians understand that there's a line that they can't cross, they're not likely to cross it.
And it's that talk of red lines for Iran and President Barack Obama's refusal to set them that has many wondering if Israel is planning to make a unilateral strike against Iran, even though the latest polls indicate many Israelis oppose such a move. Concern over a possible attack sparked this online campaign. Take a look.
Hi, I'm Ronnie. I'm 41 years old. I'm a father. I'm a graphic designer. I'm a teacher. I'm a citizen of Israel, and I need your help. Lately in the news you can hear about a war coming, a big one. Governments are talking about destruction, about self-defense, like this war is not about us. 3 days ago I posted a poster on Facebook. The message was simple: Iranian, we will never bomb your country, we love you. Attached to the poster I wrote a few words. To the Iranian people, to all father, mother, children, brothers and sisters. For there to be a war between us, first, we must be afraid one of each other. We must hate. I'm not afraid of you. I don't hate you. I don't even know you. No Iranian ever did me no harm. I never even met an Iranian, just one in Paris in a museum. Nice dude. I see sometime here on the TV an Iranian. He's talking about war. I sure it does not represent all of the people of Iran. If you see someone on your TV talking about bombing you, be sure it does not represent all of the people of Israel.
In just hours, that campaign spread across Facebook, with Iranians responding in kind. But does public opinion and do campaigns like this have any real impact, given what's at stake? And how likely is an Israeli strike against Iran? Joining us via Skype to delve into all of this is Natasha Moskovaya, Haaretz's chief U.S. correspondent. Natasha, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you.
So tell us, Natasha, how concerned do you think the average Israeli is about the possibility of a nuclear Iran?
Well, since the discussion over the possibility of Israeli strike, especially unilateral strike, became very vocal, very visible in Israel in the past month, actually, it's going on already over a year. I think the average Israeli is very concerned. It adds up, of course, to the basic so-called siege mentality of an average Israeli, because there were wars, there are threats coming from Iran. I'm not sure an average Israeli believes that the first thing the Iranian regime will do if they obtain a nuclear bomb is to push the red button and send it toward Tel Aviv. But of course, the tensions are high, and there is no consensus on a strike. It's seen as a war of choice. Clearly, there is no consensus even within members of Benjamin Netanyahu's own cabinet. And there are leaks that create even more tensions. There are, of course, negative opinions on the results of such strike coming from former military officials, the top military officials. It certainly adds to anxiety. And I think we saw in the polls since March, for example, we saw a decline of support of the public of a unilateral Israeli strike.
Trita, there's been a lot of speculation about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's intent with all his talk about red lines. Do you think he's ready to make a unilateral strike and kind of go at this alone?
I find it extremely unlikely. I can't completely dismiss it, but I would put it at less than 5%. These kind of threats from the Israeli side or promises or commitments that they would take military action have been going on for more than 10 years, and so far we haven't seen anything. In fact, I think Obama has a red line. It's actually a very clear red line. It's a more enforceable red line. And that red line is that he said that he will not accept Iran building a nuclear weapon, having a nuclear weapon. What the Netanyahu government is hoping for is that Obama would have a red line that says that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapons capability, which is far more ambiguous, much more difficult to enforce. Netanyahu himself has refused to commit to a red line. There's been unofficial Israeli red lines over the last couple of years. Iran cannot put gas into the centrifuges. They couldn't start enriching again. Then they couldn't have 3,000 centrifuges. The Iranians crossed all of those red lines with no consequence, at least not from the Israeli side. So I think from the Israeli perspective themselves, I think it's quite clear. Putting red lines can be frankly discrediting, because if you don't act on it afterwards, you're putting yourself in a worse situation. I think Obama administration is careful not to do that, and also they're very careful because they don't want to be trapped into a confrontation with Iran, a military confrontation, something that the US military for years, not just under Obama, but for the last couple of years during Bush as well, felt would be counterproductive and really would not lead to any other outcome than the fact that Iran down the road would actually build a nuclear bomb.
So would you go as far as to say that this is a bluff on the part of Netanyahu?
In my view, it is, because if you take a look at it, there's very few downsides to this bluff. On the one hand, the US could actually acquiesce and impose more sanctions on Iran or even take military action, and I think Netanyahu would be content. Or Obama can push back, which is what Obama has done. But what does that do? Well, that accentuates the difference between Obama and Romney on the issue of Israel and on the issue of Iran, which then from the Netanyahu perspective is probably calculated to benefit Romney in the upcoming elections.
So it's a win-win for Netanyahu either way. He squeezes Obama and gets what he wants, or he
I think so.
Romney.
Although I think he's overdone it, so it's starting to backfire. But if he were to actually actualize the threat and actually take military action, then he's faced with very unpredictable consequences, whereas the consequences of just making the bluff by now is pretty predictable and pretty positive.
Well, bluffing or not, what Natasha mentioned earlier was the sense of anxiety among Israelis. There's a video comment here from an Israeli American dual citizen who was detained in Iran for more than a year. Have a listen.
My name is Josh Vital, and I'm one of the hostages hikers that Iran kept to extract concessions from America. As is, an Israeli attack would be based on circumstantial evidence of Iran's nuclear program, and I'm tired of circumstantial evidence. It's how the Iraq War started, it's how they framed me in Iran. An Israeli attack would strengthen the religious right wing in the U.S., Israel, and Iran. It's exactly this kind of hostility that builds on each other and leads to irrational acts that, like my imprisonment. Until we can stop our governments from doing this sort of mutual antagonism, there's going to be more and more collateral damage.
Well, Josh there mentioned circumstantial evidence. I'd like to go to Google Hangout, where Dave is speaking to us. Dave, you're a former soldier in the Israeli army, and you told our producers ahead of time that you think that there's information that the Israeli public doesn't know that could justify going to war. And Dave, I'd like your thoughts on that circumstantial evidence that Josh was talking about, and if you believe that if a country will enter war, if it has a right or a need to tell its citizens the reasons.
Okay, so I believe first and foremost the country has a right and a duty to protect its citizens. Taking that further, looking at Israel and the unique history that it has in its short period, all the dangers that it survived and all the attacks that it's had to go through, we understand that Israel is one of the countries that is willing to make sacrifices and willing to make hard decisions. Regarding information, secret information, classified information, unfortunately, if I was privy to that, I definitely wouldn't be able to pass it on here. But for sure there are things that the media don't know. For sure there are things that most Israeli citizens don't know. And I'm sure there's things that the US government don't know. If we look recently at just what happened over in Syria, we see just a case. Of course, there's all the differences in the world, but we see a case around of people not understanding, not knowing what's going on, and a government having to make a hard decision, making the decision, and hopefully it works out for the best.
Natasha, there is often a difference between the messaging that the world sees and hears from a particular government and the thoughts and the sensibilities of the people actually living in that country. What is your sense in terms of how those two things line up between Benjamin Netanyahu's message to the world and the thoughts and the fears and the concerns of people living in Israel?
Well, first of all, I would like, by the way, to disagree on a couple of points we discussed before, because I don't think, by the way, that Netanyahu is trying to drag the U.S. to this war. I think he tries to toughen the message, to make the threat, more credible, to reduce the risk of the attack. I think that, it's important to understand that there are many things that are going on in Israel right now that are not necessarily directly linked to Iran, but for example, the condition of the economy that is going down. And for the public, I think Netanyahu's ability to rally the public behind his leadership, for example, on the issue of Iran, it is directed, among other things, on his overall performance as a prime minister, including the economy. It's pretty much the things that are going on in the US, but there are a lot of nuances in Israeli policy. And if public loses, if Netanyahu's rating goes down, so the public's trust in him, in his ability to make the right decision with regard to Iran, it is diminished also. And but by the way, I just don't think that. I think that Iranian regime is very happy to see this public debate going on right now, this dispute going on between Washington and Jerusalem. And I think that I don't think that Netanyahu made this decision. I'm not sure he's able to make it alone. I don't think he's able to do it before the U.S. elections. But Trita mentioned there the differences between Romney and Obama's policies. So I think for Netanyahu, if he is really concerned only about the Iranian issue or primarily about the Iranian issue, Obama's re-election will be much better, because for Romney, if he will be first-time president, to do something about Iran in the first few months in office, I think it just won't happen. I don't think he will be able to take any decisive action, attack to start a new war, etc. if he's elected.
Roe Eisenberg, I want to pose the question to you that I had asked of Natasha, which is how closely do the people of Israel feel the same things that we're hearing in the Netanyahu narrative, the sense of urgency, this concern over Israel essentially being, wiped off the face of the earth by Iran? Are those actual concerns that people are talking about?
Of course. I think Israel has quite a history of dealing with existential threats and specifically discussing them in the public domain. But there's a bigger concern which I'd like to address with all of this. Of course, Iran has the capability, even without nuclear weapons, to destroy a country like Israel. Currently, Iran spends $89 per capita on its military budget, which, to put in perspective, they could multiply times 100, and it wouldn't make as big of an impact on their economy as, say, our sanctions. If anything, it might even help them. So there's a conventional threat from Iran that we aren't actually talking about. Nuclear weapons are dangerous, but so are conventional ones.
Well, conventional or nuclear, Trita, there's a tweet here directed just to you. This is from Jim, and he says, why not ask Trita how Iranians feel about the existence of an Israeli nuclear arsenal? Why the double standard?
There's certainly a sense of a double standard, but I think the sense of double standard is the strongest amongst the population Not that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon and it should be entitled to. You do hear that view every once in a while. But I would say more than anything, the idea that Israel has it, Pakistan has the weapon, India has the weapon, but Iran can't even have a civilian program because the demands from the Western side has been that Iran should have no enrichment at all. It's been a zero enrichment objective. So other states can have the weapons, Iran can even have the technology to produce peaceful nuclear energy. That is something that the Iranian regime has been able to utilize to push a narrative that says that Iran is being unfairly treated, is being singled out, and there's a blatant double standard going on.
Natasha, do you foresee any scenario where the U.S. would back Israel in an attack on Iran?
Well, depends. What do you call an attack? Because Trita called
a preemptive attack to prevent nuclear weapons.
But there is obviously some covert activity that is going on that, we don't have too many actors to guess who is behind the virus said to harm Iranian centrifuges or, for example, the assassinations of a Iranian nuclear scientist, for example. It's not that no attacks are going on. It's not that there were no attacks on Israeli targets, for example, in the past. It's already over a year. So the attacks are going on. It's a sort of covert war. That the question is only whether the sides are willing to take it, to another more conventional stage. And I'm not sure that any of the sides has an interest to do so. So yes, there is a scenario because we had historic precedents. We had an attack against nuclear reactor in Iraq. We had an attack against nuclear reactor in Syria. So it can happen in Iran despite, the nuclear facilities being dispersed, despite the fact that it's technically much more difficult, and despite the fact that, the people of Iran and Israel really historically don't have any, inherent hostility toward each other. It's basically a miscalculation and ideological hostility between the regimes.
And speaking of that miscalculation, I think there's someone that might agree with you in our hangout. Roni, you created the Israel Loves Iran campaign on Facebook. There's a tweet here from Mersey who says, Israel Loves Iran is not effective at all because the government of Israel is keen to attack Iran. I'd like your thoughts on whether you think there's real online support for this. I think at last count, the Facebook campaign had about 85,000 likes. Is that a lot in a country of 7.9 million? Is that significant?
No, it's not. It's not a lot, but it just, it's a beginning. It's something because it's a country where the only thing you know about Iranian is the picture you show us before. The one where you see Ahmadinejad, traveling making the bomb with the white blouses. So that's the only thing we know in Israel about Iran for most of Israeli. So now we have something new. We have kind of a bridge where Israelis and Iranian and people in the Middle East can communicate. So, and it's only 6 months old. So 80,000, it's small, but you have to also look at the reach of the page. 2 weeks ago, we were 2 million reach in 1 week on the page. So we have a lot of Iranis coming on the page, just looking at it, not liking it, but looking at it. And people starting to understand that there is another narrative, there is another way of, understanding the Middle East. Yes. We're trying to break, that narrative, the way, the rhetoric of wars, the preemptive strikes and the building the bombs. And, in Israel, we have a lot of problems, and the last of my problem is Iran. I have so many problems, economic, social. Iran, it's the last of my concern, but we are so intoxicated about it. We have to think about it all the time, and that's the way how government keeps us from asking for other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Trita, picking up on this idea of getting to other narratives, what is the dominant false narrative coming out of Iran and coming out of Israel?
Before I go to that, let me just say something. I think what Roni and them have done is actually quite amazing. And I think it's a huge challenge to the dominant narrative that is essentially designed in a way to bring us to a confrontation. And I'm pretty confident that had Iran been a free society, you would have seen an equivalent Facebook campaign from inside of Iran. You now have it from Iranians outside of Iran, but it's much more difficult for people inside of Iran. I'm pretty confident because I think Natasha was quite right. There's no historical animosity between the two peoples, and it's very important to bring these things up because we need to think these things through very carefully. Otherwise, we will repeat exactly what happened with Iraq. And incidentally, Netanyahu gave a very famous testimony in Congress at the time in favor of going into Iraq, and of course that turned out to be something that was a huge strategic mistake for the United States. There are false narratives all over the place, and I think if we take a look first, what's happening in the United States is the narrative to think that our only options is between bombing or not bombing. From the Israeli side, I think there's been a lot of focus on some of the statements, and those are very venomous, horrific statements coming from the Iranian leadership that understandably really creates a panic inside of the Israeli government. But when you take a look at Israel's own actions, I think you see a very different interpretation of the Iranian statements, in the sense that the Israeli narrative has been that Iran is an irrational, suicidal regime. But when you take a look at how Israel has handled its rivalry with Iran, it actually behaves in a way that clearly shows that the Israeli government actually understands that it is a very calculating and rational regime. Extremist, radical, yes, but it's not suicidal and it's not irrational, and it's playing its cards very cleverly. And in my interviews with Israeli officials, that's come out very, very clearly. But if you bring down that narrative, it's much more difficult for you to convince people to go to war. But if you make the argument that the other side is suicidal, that they are irrational, then not only can you forego diplomacy, you can also forego containment and deterrence and swiftly move towards preventive military action, which is what I think the Netanyahu government's preference is.
Well, Veronica and Google Plus, I'd like to go to you because I want to parse out what Trita just called the calculating governments from the people. There's a tweet here from Free Thinking Kenyan who says the Israeli public needs to come out against war with Iran like Occupy came out against the Wall Street. And that would galvanize world opinion. Now, you work in tourism, and earlier we saw mass protests against societal ills in Israeli society, the J14 protest. Are we seeing the same thing, or will we see the same thing against war with Iran?
Hi, first of all, hello, shalom, good evening everyone. It's Eden from Israel, and I would be happy to answer your question. I think Israelis are waking right now. The social protest is a relatively new thing in Israel, and some of the protest is against war. It's actually pro-peace, and I have to say that it's really something it's nice to see that our young people, students, and even families are going outside of the street and are saying their voice. I think a lot of protest is going on the internet, like one's website, showing that the Israelis do care and they want to meet the Iranians, although it's unfortunately on the other side of the screen in this point. I also want to say that we all hear the daily threats about the war, and it's scary, but I want to say that my goal to participate in this discussion is to raise something that there are people behind the headlines, and there are people behind the headlines, there are families, there are kids, there are students. I think most of the Israeli public wants to live in peace, wants to achieve some kind of communication with our neighbors. And the protest should be also against the war more loudly, and it should be around the world as well. And I would be happy to see our friends in Iran are raising the flag of peace and bringing it up as well. Thank you.
Well, you mentioned people behind the headlines. Now we have about 30 seconds, but Ido, I want to go to you because you're a former paratrooper. Your thoughts? Looks like you might need to unmute.
I can answer because I was also a former paratrooper.
Go ahead.
If you like.
You have about 15 seconds.
I think the streets of Tel Aviv and of Israel are really, people don't think it's going to happen. So that's why they don't get on the streets. To them, it's something that's happening for 10 years now, the threats of Iran, and nobody really cares about it because Israelis have other problems, much more serious.
We'll talk about those other problems in our post-show. So thank you for bringing that up.
We will indeed. Everybody sit tight because we're going to continue the conversation at streamed@aljazeera.com. Tomorrow we're going to be talking anti-Japan protests in China. Have they gone too far? Tweet us your thoughts on that. And until then, we'll see you online. Welcome back to the Stream's online post show. We're talking about Israel and Iran, the various narratives that are going on, and what Israelis really think about all of that. We've got 5 Israelis in our Google Hangout today. But I want to go back first to Natasha Moskovaya. Natasha, there is so much that people hear right now. They hear from Benjamin Netanyahu, they hear from the intelligence community, they hear from the media, they hear from allied forces. Who do you think the average Israeli is taking his or her cue from on the topic of Iran?
Well, I think it really depends, because it could be even rumors, from pretty much every week I'm getting this chat or a phone call with the question, did you hear the Sabbath, like the Saturday rumor? I'm saying, like, no. What is the Saturday rumor? That Israel is going to attack Iran on Saturday. And then, another Saturday passes and the Iranian nuclear facilities are still intact. So there is a lot of rumors going on in between official statements. And then you have even the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. who is asked whether Israel is going to attack, and he says that he's not in the loop on the decisions on this. So basically it's a very, very, very small circle of people who are making the decisions, and all the rest, I think their opinion will be based on their trust in the leadership of the country and their ability, I think, to visualize the consequences of the war. Because when Minister of Defense of Israel, Ehud Barak, said that this war will have something like 500 victims, I think no Israeli would volunteer to become one of these 500. I mean, the war in Lebanon, there were, I think, 165 victims in Israel, but the north of the country was paralyzed. I don't think any Israeli would like to recreate this. So when people start thinking about how it would actually look like the day after the attack, I think their perceptions change.
There's members of our community that seem to say they don't think that government officials are hearing what the people in our hangout are saying today. There's a tweet here from Tessika who says, where are the government officials in this debate? I hope that they're listening in. Trita, I know you wanted to say something before we get to you. As the main show is ending, we were going to hear from Ido in our Google Plus hangout. Ido, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And I think you've told our producers that you honestly don't think there's any other option to war, and it might come down to that. Do you still believe that?
I think Israel, throughout the years, never take any aggressive part against any country until there was no other way. So I really don't think any act of aggression will be something that is the Israeli officials. I think it's true. I think we're going to attack just about when things are about to get the worst from our side, which means bombs falling on Tel Aviv. That's about it.
He said there may not be any other way, Trita.
No, I think we're far from such a scenario in which there wouldn't be any other way. But I also want to say, I think what Natasha said is very important to understand. Israel is a modern society, and modern societies have much greater difficulty sustaining a war that comes to their own territory. And I think the Lebanese war is an example of that. 1/3 of Israel's population was internally displaced because of the rockets flying in from Hezbollah. And you saw very quickly how public opinion in Israel, having originally been quite much in favor of the war, within 2 weeks turned around, and after 34 days the Israelis pulled out. Compare that to Iran. Iran is not an open society, is not a free country. And they did have an experience in which they had 8 years of war with Iraq. They sustained it for that long. At the end of it, of course, they had to agree to a ceasefire. So there's certain strengths that I think if there is coming to a war, the Iranians would utilize against a country like Israel. And I think it's very important for people to understand these things because, again, it's not to the benefit of anyone to commit such a huge mistake that would lead to the entire region being caught on fire. Everyone will burn.
Dave Goldberg in our Google Hangout, you wanted to jump in on this one.
So I just wanted to put something forward that I've noticed definitely from the stream here, and I think it's a feature of the wider Israeli society. We have these two opinions, but I think they're really one. Israel as a nation, as well as its leaders, and definitely the Jewish people, want nothing more than peace. And we will do everything in our power to get there. And people like Bibi Netanyahu may put his good name on the line by giving out ideas and plans and demands for Obama and things like that, where really it's some sort of backhanded plan to try and get action to be taken place so that an attack on Iran doesn't have to happen. But at the same time, is this balance of peace. And I just want to reiterate that we're going now into the holy days of Yom Kippur in the Jewish religion, and we pray for world peace, not just for the Jewish people, but for all people. So peace is number one. But at the same time, we need to balance that. We know, like I mentioned before from our history, that we have to be prepared, and we have to be willing, and we have to be able. And with threats such as the Iranian threat, and I'm not just talking about the possibility of them developing some sort of weapons that could be very dangerous. I'm talking specifically about their rhetoric. I'm specifically talking about the way that they've categorized our people, the symbolism they use in the media, the methods they use to dehumanize us, calling us cancers and things like that. We know that there is a real danger here, and it is something that needs to be dealt with. And what I'd love to see, which is very, I think, inspiring from our side here, the Israel Loves Iran campaign. I would love to see something from the other side. I would love to see Iranian people in the streets coming out and saying, no, we know the Jewish people, we know the Israeli people, the country, we recognize you, and we don't want to fight with you. We don't need nuclear weapons to attack you. We don't need any sort of conflict. We want peace.
Well, actually, we have seen campaigns like that. There's one that I'm pulling up here on my screen on Facebook, Iran Loves Israel, 24,000 likes. So that is happening as well. But I'd like to go back to Google Hangout because Rowie has a follow-up. Go ahead, Rowie.
Yes. You know, when people talk about how there's a disconnect between the Israel government and the wishes of the population of Israel, you need to remember that that's the essential marker of a democracy, that you can have one side of your population want to go to war and another population completely do everything in its power to prevent that war. I mean, South Park did an episode on this in the aftermath of the Iraq War, because that is an essential part of democracy, going back to, you know, if you read the history of the Peloponnesian War, they're arguing whether or not to go to war with Sparta. And it brings up the point of agency, which I'd really like to bring this up.
Rowie, we've only got, Rowie, I'm sorry, we've only got about 10 seconds left, but I want to thank all of our guests for joining us today. Please continue this conversation online and on Twitter, on Facebook. What an important conversation to be having. We want to jump over to Malika right now with a few other leads that we're following.
For months, the walls of Mohammed Mahmoud Street in downtown Cairo have been covered with revolutionary graffiti. It commemorates the uprising and those who died, as this mural posted by the Musareen group shows. But activists say government workers are destroying it. In this video by Hossam Minai, nighttime workers paint over graffiti on a street that saw some of the fiercest fighting. The response online was quick. Graffiti in Mohammed Mahmoud Street was an incredible work of art, a testament of history, not random spraying, Bassem tweets. Others painted over the whitewash. The graffiti here reads, "Erase again, you cowardly regime." We've collected more images on our website, so head to stream.aljazeera.com and check them out. Our next lead's from France, where a magazine that published caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad says their website was hacked. Satirical weekly Charlie Hebdo printed the images Wednesday, shortly after the site was temporarily inaccessible. The alleged hacking was just one response to the images, which follow recent violent protests against an anti-Islam film. France has banned demonstrations against that video and will close key embassies on Friday. Just so I'm clear, protest against anti-Islam film in France, banned. Clearly provocative new Muhammad cartoons, free speech. That right? Asked Sarah. And Hen writes, "You know what insults me? People claiming printing of cartoons is for free speech while making money doing it." That conversation is continuing online, and we'll continue to follow it. So tweet us your thoughts at #AJStream. Lisa?
All right, thanks again to Trita and Natasha and everyone on Google+. We hope that you continue this conversation online. Now, on Thursday, anti-Japan protests in China. Have they gone too far? We're going to talk with Chinese netizens about this topic, and we'd love for you to tweet in your thoughts and questions. Until then, we'll see you online.